Tyler Robinson, the 22-year-old alleged murderer of Charlie Kirk, has been charged. We're going to hear the charges in a moment. He is facing...
Imagine this. The headline flashes across your screen like a thunderbolt. Charlie Kirk's killer, sentenced to death. Goodbye forever. Instantly
carried out the murder.
Today, after reviewing the evidence that law enforcement has collected thus far, I am filing a criminal information charging Tyler James Robinson, age 22, with...
The internet erupts. Hashtags trend worldwide. Fans are shocked, and critics whisper that this case is bigger than anyone could have predicted. But wait. Before you think this is just another open and shut courtroom drama, the story takes a darker, stranger twist. Reports are swirling, rumors are multiplying, and commentary is spilling out faster than anyone can keep up. What really happened inside that tense courtroom? Who exactly is Tyler Robinson, the man being painted as both a cold-blooded assassin and a tragic figure who spiraled out of control? And most importantly, why does it feel like this case isn't about one man, but about the entire future of political discourse in America? On one side, grieving families and loyal supporters demand the harshest punishment imaginable, convinced that justice can only come with the ultimate sentence. On the other, voices rise in outrage, warning that something about this case doesn't add up, that the evidence
of the charges against him.
Today, after reviewing the evidence that law enforcement has collected thus far, I am filing a criminal information charging Tyler James Robinson, age 22.
Evidence being paraded in front of the cameras is hiding deeper secrets. Emotions ran high as family members broke down in tears. Prosecutors hurled accusations like daggers, and the public was left to
determine Robinson's fate.
Count 1, aggravated murder, a capital offense, for intentionally or knowingly causing the death of Charlie Kirk under circumstances that created a great risk of death to others. Count 2, felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury, a first-degree felony. The state is further alleging aggravating factors on counts 1 and 2 because the defendant is believed to have targeted Charlie Kirk based on Charlie Kirk's political expression and did so knowing that
left divided, unable to decide whether this was true justice or a spectacle meant to silence bigger truths. Tonight we dive into every jaw-dropping twist, every whispered betrayal, and every shocking revelation surrounding the case that has the nation holding its breath. Inside that dimly lit courtroom, the tension was so thick it felt like the air itself was on trial. Tyler Robinson sat silently, his hands folded, his expression unreadable, while the prosecution painted him as the monster who had turned a campus event into a national tragedy. The audience was packed with journalists, political commentators, and family members, all of them waiting to hear every charged word. What was supposed to be a routine legal proceeding had turned into something much larger, a spectacle that had the entire nation watching, whispering, and speculating. And as the charges were read out, emotions surged like waves crashing against a fragile shore. The prosecutor's voice echoed with deliberate weight, listing the accusations one after another. Aggravated murder, obstruction of justice, tampering with witnesses. Every phrase carried the kind of finality that made onlookers gasp, some in grief, some in anger, and others in disbelief. The family of Charlie Kirk sat in the front row, their faces etched with sorrow, but also with a fierce determination that justice had to be done. Erica Kirk, the widow, clutched her hands so tightly they turned pale. Her eyes locked on the man accused of stealing her husband's life. Her silence was louder than any words could have been, radiating pain and defiance all at once. Students who had once come to Kirk's campus events with curiosity and criticism now whispered to each other about how close they had been to chaos. One young woman shook her head repeatedly, saying she could still hear the echo of the shot that shattered what was supposed to be a day of debate and ideas. Another claimed that since that day, she hadn't been able to sleep without replaying the image of Kirk collapsing on stage. It was clear that this trial wasn't just about one man facing charges, It was about an entire community, haunted by trauma, the evidence, piece by piece, like puzzle fragments snapping into place. The prosecutor spoke of DNA on the rifle trigger, a note tucked beneath a keyboard that read like a confession, and messages to a roommate that sounded like digital daggers. Each revelation sent ripples through the room. Some shook their heads in disgust, others covered their mouths in shock, and a few turned away, unable to handle the graphic details. One journalist leaned over to another and whispered, "This is not just a trial, it's a national reckoning." But behind the facts, there was another story that few dared to speak out loud. The story of who Tyler Robinson had once been. Friends from his high school days remembered him as a quiet, brilliant student, someone who had seemed destined for greatness. His former teachers described him as a star pupil who devoured books and aced every exam. So how had this young man, once celebrated for his mind, ended up accused of assassination? It was this question that made the case feel less like a courtroom battle and more like a tragic play, with a fallen protagonist who had lost his way. Whispers swirled that Robinson had been caught between two worlds: his family's conservative upbringing and his new beliefs that clashed violently with those roots. A neighbor spoke to reporters outside the courthouse, saying that she had watched him grow up, had seen him ride bikes in the street, had seen his parents beam with pride at his graduation. She confessed she couldn't reconcile the boy she remembered with the man in the green jumpsuit, staring blankly at the judge. It was as if two different people existed inside him, one hopeful and bright, the other dark and consumed. The drama escalated when the defense finally rose to speak. Their strategy was not to deny the shocking evidence, but to suggest that Robinson had been pushed, manipulated, and cornered by the toxic climate of political discourse. They argued that the country itself bore responsibility, that the endless cycle of hate, outrage, and division had created a tinderbox in which tragedies like this could ignite. As the defense lawyer spoke, gasps filled the room, not because of the words themselves, but because they seemed to strike a nerve. Some nodded, others shouted in anger, but everyone felt the sting of that accusation. Was society itself on trial alongside Robinson? The judge, stern and unflinching, warned that this was a courtroom, not a theater. But it was too late. The proceedings had already become a performance, one that audiences outside the courthouse were consuming like a reality show. News networks cut live to reactions, commentators spun theories, and social media feeds overflowed with outrage and speculation. One viral post read, "America has lost its way if we have to watch this like an episode of primetime drama." Another countered, "Justice must be seen to be done, even if it feels like a show." Inside, the drama only deepened when the prosecutor unveiled the bullet casings with inscriptions etched into their sides. "Hey fascist, catch," one read, words that sent shivers through the courtroom. Others contained references to internet memes, gaming culture, and cryptic phrases that left observers both baffled and disturbed. Prosecutors called it a window into the twisted mind of the accused. Defense attorneys countered that it was the product of a young man drowning in digital chaos, disconnected from reality, grasping for identity in an online world that thrives on provocation. As emotions built, family members of Robinson were called forward. His parents, visibly torn apart, admitted they had recognized their son in surveillance footage and turned him in. Gasps echoed again. How could parents hand over their own child, no matter the crime? But as his father spoke, voice breaking, it became clear. "We couldn't lie to ourselves," he said softly. "We raised him to know right from wrong, and what he did was wrong." Tears fell across the courtroom, some for the victim, some for the parents, and some for the broken figure of Robinson himself, who finally shifted in his chair, his mask of indifference cracking just slightly. The clash between grief and blame, justice and redemption, hung over the room like a storm cloud that refused to break. Outside, crowds had gathered with signs, some demanding the death penalty, others pleading for mercy. Chants collided in the air, a chaotic chorus that reflected the divisions tearing at the country itself. Reporters captured every shout, every tear, every raised fist, knowing that this case was not just news, but history unfolding before their cameras. And yet, as the gavel struck and the session adjourned for the day, no one felt satisfied. Not the family who had lost a husband and father, not the supporters who demanded swift punishment, not the critics who warned of deeper issues festering beneath the surface. The courtroom emptied, but the questions lingered heavier than ever, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the cries, the accusations, and the unspoken fears. What was justice in a world where tragedy had become spectacle? And who, if anyone, could claim victory when so much had already been lost? The next day began with the same heavy atmosphere, but somehow it felt even more suffocating. The courthouse was surrounded by cameras and crowds before sunrise, each person desperate to catch a glimpse of the man at the center of it all. Tyler Robinson was brought in under heavy guard, his face pale and blank, as if the weight of the entire world pressed down on his shoulders. Inside, the seats filled up quickly, leaving late arrivals standing in the aisles. Everyone wanted to hear what new twists the prosecution and defense would reveal, and no one was prepared for how explosive the proceedings would become. The prosecutor wasted no time in setting the stage, laying out evidence that went beyond the physical. They brought in digital forensics experts who detailed the chilling online trail Robinson had left behind. His messages to his roommate were read aloud, the words echoing in the silent room like confessions shouted through a megaphone. "I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to take it." That line alone sent an audible shiver through the gallery. Erica Kirk covered her mouth, her body trembling as supporters reached out to comfort her. On the other side of the room, Robinson's parents sat frozen, eyes locked on the floor as if they couldn't bear to meet the stares of those around them. But then came the defense's counterattack, a performance that stunned even the most hardened reporters. The lawyer stepped forward, his voice rising and falling with practiced drama, declaring that this case was more than murder. It was the story of a young man consumed by a broken system. He argued that Robinson's descent was fueled by years of online radicalization, isolation, and emotional turmoil, painting him as a victim of toxic digital culture. "This young man was not born a killer," he said, pointing directly at the jury. "He was made into one by a society that feeds off division, anger, and hate." The words drew gasps, but also murmurs of agreement from some who felt the truth in them. Suddenly, the trial wasn't just about Charlie Kirk's death anymore. It was about America itself. Networks outside the courtroom spun the defense's argument into fiery debates. Was Robinson a monster who chose violence, or a broken figure molded by a political climate poisoned with rage? Emotions ran high as commentators clashed on live television, while families at home argued over dinner tables. The trial had spilled out of the courtroom and into the living rooms of millions, becoming a mirror reflecting the chaos of a divided nation. Inside, tensions reached a breaking point when a witness took the stand. A former classmate of Robinson who revealed stories from his teenage years. She described him as brilliant but troubled, someone who once talked endlessly about conspiracies and politics, even as early as 8th grade. "He scared me sometimes," she admitted, her voice shaking. It wasn't just what he knew. It was how angry he sounded when he talked about it. Her testimony painted a picture of a boy who had always carried the seeds of conflict, seeds that eventually blossomed into something catastrophic. At that moment, Robinson's eyes flickered for the first time, his calm mask giving way to a shadow of shame. Then came the twist no one saw coming. The defense called Robinson's roommate to the stand, the very person who had received those incriminating messages. The room went still as the roommate walked in, head bowed, hands shaking. When asked about the night of the shooting, the roommate admitted to deleting some of the messages after Robinson begged him to. "He told me to keep quiet, to protect him," the roommate confessed. Gasps erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously, and the judge pounded his gavel to restore order. The revelation created a new storm of outrage, casting doubts on whether even more evidence had been lost, and raising questions about how far Robinson had gone to cover his tracks. The gallery was buzzing with whispers. Some accused the roommate of betrayal for not immediately going to the authorities, while others saw him as another victim caught in Robinson's spiral. The defense seized the moment, arguing that Robinson's desperation showed not a calculating mastermind, but a terrified young man unraveling under pressure. "Look at him," the lawyer said, gesturing toward Robinson. "This is not the face of evil incarnate. This is the face of a broken soul who made catastrophic mistakes." The prosecutor fired back with fire in his voice. Broken or not, choices were made. A father was killed, a family destroyed, and a community scarred forever. His words cut through the air, leaving silence in their wake. The jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats, visibly torn between the two narratives being laid before them. Every word spoken in that courtroom seemed to tilt the balance between life and death. Outside, the crowd erupted again as news spread of the roommate's testimony. Protesters clashed verbally, some demanding the death penalty immediately. Others insisting the case revealed a system that had failed both the victim and the accused. Emotions spiraled higher, creating an atmosphere of near chaos. Police were forced to intervene to keep the two sides apart, but the shouting only grew louder. "Justice for Charlie!" one group screamed, while another countered with, "End the cycle of hate." The courthouse had become not just a center of law, but a battleground for America's deepest divisions. By the time the judge adjourned, people were left reeling, unsure of where the case would go next. The families of both Kirk and Robinson walked out under heavy guard, their faces a portrait of grief and exhaustion. Fans of Kirk sobbed openly, clutching posters of him as though holding on to pieces of his legacy. Robinson's parents, meanwhile, looked hollowed out, caught in the unbearable position of mourning their son's life even before the verdict had been reached. As the doors closed and the cameras zoomed in, the question lingered heavy in the air. Was justice truly within reach, or was this trial destined to leave everyone broken? The courthouse was buzzing with anticipation as the third day of proceedings began. The nation had already been glued to every twist and turn, but what was about to unfold would take the drama to an entirely new level. Spectators lined up outside before dawn, eager for a seat inside, while others clutched their phones and tablets, waiting for live updates. The trial had transformed into a public spectacle, a stage where tragedy and politics collided in front of millions. Whispers of shocking new evidence rippled through the hallways, raising tension to the point where even the air felt electric. The prosecutor opened with a move that stunned the gallery. He presented the engraved bullet casings not just as physical evidence, but as windows into the accused's state of mind. The words scrawled into the metal were read aloud in chilling detail, phrases dripping with venom, memes twisted into threats, and crude jabs aimed at Kirk's politics. The prosecutor's voice boomed as he declared, "This wasn't an impulsive act. This was deliberate, calculated, and designed to send a message." The crowd gasped, some covering their mouths, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The image of Robinson as a cold planner was now etched into everyone's mind. But then the defense struck back, and the tension spiked again. They called a psychologist to the stand, who painted a picture of a young man swallowed whole by the toxic cocktail of isolation, online radicalization, and suppressed emotions. The psychologist described Robinson's spiral into digital echo chambers where rage was rewarded and compassion mocked. "Tyler Robinson," she said softly, "is not a monster by birth. He is a product of an environment that celebrated violence and scorned vulnerability." Her words didn't excuse the act, but they forced the courtroom to look deeper, beyond the crime itself, into the storm that had shaped it. Some nodded in agreement, while others whispered angrily, refusing to see him as anything but the villain of this tragedy. The real explosion came when a surprise witness was called. A former friend who claimed Robinson had hinted at his plans days before the shooting. The friend's testimony was raw, describing late-night conversations where Robinson expressed his growing resentment. He said he felt like no one listened unless you shouted, and sometimes shouting wasn't enough, the friend revealed. The statement hit like a thunderclap. Suddenly, it wasn't just about political anger. It was about a young man consumed by a need to be heard, no matter the cost. In the front row, Erica Kirk broke down sobbing, clutching a tissue as supporters surrounded her with comfort. The contrast between her grief and the defense's attempt to humanize Robinson left the room divided like never before. Reporters outside erupted with breaking news alerts. Television pundits shouted over each other, debating whether the trial was about justice or about society's failings. Some accused the defense of turning a murderer into a victim, while others argued that ignoring the systemic roots of violence meant ignoring the truth. Social media lit up with hashtags, "Justice for Charlie" clashing against "Savory Youth." Each side locked in a war of words that mirrored the chaos inside the courtroom. Fans of Kirk posted emotional tributes, while Robinson's supporters pleaded for compassion, sparking heated digital clashes that showed no sign of slowing down. Back inside, the prosecutor brought the focus back to the family. They called Kirk's brother to the stand, and his testimony was devastating. His voice cracked as he described the phone call he received the day of the shooting, the frantic rush to the hospital, and the moment he realized his brother wasn't coming back. "Our family is shattered," he said through tears, "and no sentence will bring Charlie back." His words drew tears from the gallery, even from strangers who had never met Kirk, but felt the weight of the family's loss. Robinson, for the first time, lowered his head, as if the reality of what he had done finally pierced the armor of his silence. As if the courtroom needed more fuel, the defense then dropped their own bombshell. They claimed there were inconsistencies in the initial police response, pointing to the false alert that the suspect had been apprehended while Robinson was still at large. They suggested this confusion raised questions about the integrity of the investigation. The judge's face tightened, clearly displeased, but he allowed the line of questioning to continue. Suddenly, the narrative shifted again. Was the state as infallible as it claimed, or had mistakes been made that could cast doubt on the case? Whispers spread across the room. Reporters scrambled for quotes, and the already fragile balance of opinion tilted dangerously. Outside, the crowds grew more restless. Opposing groups clashed verbally, police forming barricades to keep them apart. Chants for justice collided with chants for mercy, creating a wall of noise that reverberated through the courthouse walls. It was chaos, but it was also symbolic. The entire nation's division playing out in front of cameras. Inside, the judge pounded his gavel, demanding order. But even he seemed to know that control was slipping, that this was no longer just a trial, but a cultural earthquake. As the day's session drew to a close, one final detail emerged that left everyone stunned. Investigators revealed they had recovered Robinson's practice targets, riddled with bullet holes, each marked with phrases directed at Kirk. The chilling discovery added another layer of premeditation, reinforcing the prosecution's claim that this was not a crime of passion, but a calculated execution. The gallery sat in stunned silence as the targets were displayed, each hole like a reminder of what had been lost. When the gavel finally struck, ending the day's proceedings, people left the courthouse dazed, drained, and divided. Some clung to the belief that justice was inevitable. Others argued that redemption was still possible. And many more were simply lost in the storm of emotions the trial had unleashed. Robinson was escorted out, his face unreadable, while Kirk's family was shielded by supporters as they made their way through flashing cameras. The nation held its breath, knowing that the story was far from over, and that the next chapter could change everything. The final stretch of the trial arrived like the climax of a long-running drama, and everyone knew this was the day emotions would boil over. The courtroom was at full capacity, every seat occupied by journalists, supporters, protesters, and families who had waited for weeks to see how this storm would end. Cameras outside captured the throngs of people chanting, some demanding the death penalty, others holding signs pleading for mercy. The atmosphere was suffocating, as if the walls themselves were bending under the weight of tension and expectation. As proceedings began, the prosecution made its last stand. Their words were sharp and deliberate, painting a portrait of a young man who had not only taken a life, but shaken the very foundation of free speech and political discourse. This was not just an attack on one man, the prosecutor thundered. This was an attack on the idea that we can debate, disagree, and still live. It was a shot aimed at the heart of democracy itself. The room was so quiet after his words that even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Eyes turned toward the jury, whose faces revealed nothing, but whose hearts must have been pounding with the burden of deciding life or death. The defense countered with passion that bordered on desperation. The lawyer pleaded with the jury to see Robinson as more than the sum of his darkest act. "Yes, tragedy happened," he said, his voice trembling, "but justice should not be vengeance. This young man is broken, not beyond redemption. If we take his life, we only repeat the cycle of hate that led us here." He gestured toward Robinson, who sat motionless, his face pale but his eyes wet with tears for the first time. Whispers spread through the gallery as onlookers wondered if they were finally seeing the true human beneath the mask. Then came the testimony that no one expected. Erica Kirk, widow of Charlie Kirk, requested to address the court. When she stood, the room seemed to hold its breath. Her voice was steady but heavy with grief. She spoke of her husband not as a political figure, but as a father, a partner, a man who made her laugh in the mornings and held their child at night. "My family will never be the same," she said, her eyes locked on Robinson. "You stole a future from us." Her words pierced the air like knives, and tears rolled down faces across the room. But then she added, almost in a whisper, "And yet, taking your life won't bring him back." Gasps erupted. Some supporters applauded her compassion. Others shook their heads in disbelief, unable to understand forgiveness in the face of such devastation. Her statement blurred the lines between justice and mercy, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. The judge's instructions to the jury were long and meticulous, but no amount of legal precision could erase the raw emotion that hung in the air. The jury deliberated for hours, each tick of the clock adding fuel to the growing tension outside. Protesters clashed again, the sound of shouting spilling into the night. News anchors speculated endlessly, dissecting every word, every gesture, every piece of evidence, while millions watched from their living rooms, waiting for the verdict that would define the case. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom felt like it had been plunged into ice. The foreperson stood, voice trembling as they read the decision. "Guilty on all counts." The room erupted. Some gasped in relief, others cried out in anger. Robinson sat frozen, his lips pressed tightly together, eyes fixed on the floor. His parents broke down, sobbing quietly, while Kirk's family clung to each other in a mix of sorrow and vindication. But the climax came moments later, when the judge announced the jury's recommendation. "Death." The words echoed like a thunderclap. Some cheered, others wept, and still others left the room in stunned silence. Outside, crowds erupted, the two sides colliding in chants louder than ever before. Justice for Charlie clashed with cries of "Stop the cycle," creating a storm of voices that symbolized the fractured soul of a nation. Inside, the judge struck his gavel again and again, but the room was already drowning in emotion too big to contain. As Robinson was led away, shackled and expressionless, a reporter shouted a question. Did he regret what he had done? He didn't answer, but for a brief moment his eyes flickered with something. Remorse, defiance, or perhaps just the emptiness of a life unraveling. It was impossible to tell. What was clear was that the story had reached its end in the courtroom, but its echoes would continue to rattle across America for years to come. The families left the courthouse under heavy guard, one grieving a loss that could never be healed, the other grappling with the devastation of watching their son condemned to death. The gallery slowly emptied, but the sense of finality refused to settle. Everyone who had been present carried with them not just the verdict, but the haunting memory of a trial that revealed not only the depths of one man's actions, but also the cracks running through a divided nation. And as the courthouse doors closed, the world outside was left asking the question no verdict could answer. Was this truly justice, or just another chapter in a cycle of pain that has no end? This saga didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the opening of an even bigger storm. As the news of the death sentence spread, social media exploded. Hashtags dominated the feeds. Justice for Charlie, Tyler's, Enton's, goodbye forever. Emotions ran high as fans mourned, critics debated, and families were left divided over whether this was justice or vengeance. The story had jumped from courtrooms to dinner tables, from cable news panels to late-night talk shows. Every corner of the country was now buzzing with one question. Had the scales of justice truly balanced, or had they tilted too far? Outside the courthouse, people were still chanting, their voices raw with passion. Some clapped, insisting the death sentence was the only way to honor Charlie Kirk's memory. Others wept, holding up signs that pleaded for compassion, warning that taking one life in exchange for another would never heal the wounds. It was chaos and catharsis all at once, the kind of scene that defined an era where outrage was louder than reason. Inside homes across America, families argued in front of glowing TV screens. Some pointed to the engraved bullets, the confessions, the planning, and declared that the sentence was deserved. Others insisted the tragedy went deeper, that society had failed a young man who could have been saved. The nation was divided not just about Tyler Robinson, but about itself, about how it handled anger, division, and violence in an age when everyone was shouting, but no one was listening. As for Robinson, his fate was sealed, but the mystery of his mind remained. How had a boy once celebrated for his brilliance spiraled into this? How had online games, digital echo chambers, and political fury twisted him so far? The questions lingered, heavy and unresolved, like a fog that refused to lift. For Erica Kirk and her family, the verdict meant closure of one kind, but no verdict could ever replace the husband, the father, the man they had lost. Her words echoed long after the trial ended. Taking his life won't bring Charlie back. It was both a wound and a warning, one that haunted everyone who heard it. And now, as the story closes on this courtroom drama, the stage is left wide open for you. What do you think? Was the death penalty justice or just another tragedy stacked on top of one already too heavy to bear? Should society focus on punishment or prevention? Your voice matters here. So tell us in the comments below. What side are you on? Don't just watch the drama unfold, be a part of it. Hit that like button. If you felt the weight of this story, subscribe for more shocking updates, and ring the bell so you never miss when the next twist drops. This isn't just news. It's history in the making, and you're right at the center of it.